Welcome to Digital Stratosphere, the podcast of all things technology independent and agnostic. I am Kyler Cheatham, your host today, Global Marketing Director here at Third Stage Consulting Group. And I am very excited to welcome our guest, Mitch Ottoson, to talk to us about the risks of lagging user adoption within a digital transformation. Definitely a really important subject, and we're so excited to have you here today, Mitch. So thank you for joining.
Hi, Kyler. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, always when we can get on your busy schedule, huh?
That's right. I always make time for you, though.
Yeah, right. Mitch is a favorite with our clients, so we are extremely excited to have his bandwidth with us today and to help us understand how we can maximize the business value of a digital transformation on really the front lines of our workforce. So, Mitch, can you give us just a basic definition of what is user adoption and why is it important?
Sure. I really view user adoption as the folks that are on your front line that are responsible for the day in and day out tasks, that know how to use the system, are actively engaged in using the system, and really feel empowered to use the new system after you've gone through and implemented a new technology.
And so what happens if you go through selecting a software, implementing this new software, and then people aren't using it? What happens to the overall investment at that point?
At that point, in my opinion, your project has failed. It's really hard to get people back on the bus after the bus has already left the station. So, you really are, I think of the analogy, you're the dog chasing the car at that point in time, because if your users aren't using the system, then they're obviously going through and using workarounds. And if they're continuing to use workarounds, then you're not getting the value out of the integration of the system itself. And that's a problem. And so you'll find yourself with all the same data issues, with the same lack of visibility, with the same mistrust in the data that you had before the system that likely led you to the transformational project itself.
And could you give an example of a workaround that you've seen in some of your client work?
Yeah, but how much time do we have on this podcast?
we have as long as you'll let us talk to you. So.
There you go. I would say the biggest one is just keeping manual record in Excel spreadsheets. And we usually find this when folks already don't trust the systems and they feel like they can keep better data themselves. So inventory is a good one, or financial statements and the data required to build financial statements, maybe the way that an executive likes, or whatever the reason, the driver is for it, taking data out of a system, putting it into Excel, manipulating it, and then either feeding it back into the system, or what could even be worse is not feeding it back into the system and just knowing, hey, that's just not right in the system. Don't go there. Email me if you need this number. So those are some of the things that we've run into in the last couple of weeks with our clients.
So when you are looking at an organization that may be very tribal knowledge heavy or be utilizing those more manual systems, what are some things that you recommend to them and just kind of forward thinking that user adoption might be an issue for them?
Yeah, we generally do an organizational readiness assessment, and we look for those exact things to try and understand, hey, how are you using your tools today? Where are there opportunities for improvement, and bring those to the forefront to really craft our change plan. And once we've identified that there could be a possibility of that, of users not wanting to adopt, we really do try and make an effort up front to try and let the end users realize and understand the value that they need to. Oftentimes, people will take data out of the system because they don't see the value in keeping it in the system. And so we'll try and educate those users on here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's why it's important to maintain this data. And here's what's in it for you. That's a common phrase that we'll use is the WIFM, what's in it for me. And by putting that on, the top of people's minds, hopefully we can make processes and procedures better for people. Maybe not all around, we're not going to solve everybody's problems, but at least we can say from an organizational standpoint, here's the benefits that you would get. And hopefully you'll realize some of those benefits yourselves in your day job.
Absolutely. I think that what's in it for me or just the purpose that we talk about behind a lot of our human behavior tactics. Why are we doing this? What does it mean? And the importance of really being transparent and explaining that.
Yeah.
So when it comes to looking at the actual plan and the strategies that you put into place, when it comes to user adoption, what are some risks if you don't consider all of the things that you talked about up front and just kind of take that more stick type of approach of they will use this is their job expectation. And as a company leader, if they don't, well, then that's their problem.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we generally will go in and do an impact analysis to say, here's the impact of making this change from a financial standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, and here's the benefits to your organization by making this change. And if they take the stick approach, we really find that you aren't maximizing that value. If it's really shoved down people's throats, they're going to leave, or they're just going to not do it. They'll resist. And so what's worse is you could lose the tribal knowledge and be right back in the situation you were in before. So it could end up that you're in a worse place before your transformation than you were before you got started.
So Mitch, that's all great information, especially in laying out what those risks will be for the organization. And say they didn't reach that business value, how do you know that it's because of resistance on the user level versus training or the uncomfortableness of having a new system?
That one is harder to distinguish. I think when you go through and one exercise that we'll go through is a reverse demo. We'll have the end user go through and show us their perspective on how something is done. And usually that'll shine through with just the way that they navigate the system and their comments as they're going through when you're asking someone to explain what it is that they're doing. A lot of, I don't know, I just click here because that's what I wrote down in my steps or something along those lines, or this is where I stop and pull it out of Excel because it just doesn't work for me. Those types of comments generally just believe it's a lack of user adoption and a lack of training. There's usually some enthusiasm behind it, but they just don't really know exactly what to do. But those two things are oftentimes that line is blurred, I would say.
Yeah. And those learning styles too. I know when I have a new system, unless I kind of get in there and experience it myself, it's really difficult for me to be trained on it, with somebody else going through it. So I'm sure that's a consideration as well.
Definitely. An effective training plan can really help to overcome user adoptions. Oftentimes people will just say, I don't know, this system is so above me. Why bother trying to learn it? I'll never learn it. And having that attitude because the training wasn't very good, could very well be the outcome. So I think those two things definitely go hand in hand. You made a great point.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some resistance and strategies when we come back from a quick break.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Welcome back to Digital Stratosphere, all things technology independent and agnostic. I am here with Senior Manager Mitch Ottoson, and he is talking us through user adoption. He gave us some great definitions and kind of outlined the risks before our break. And now we're going to dig into what those resistance impact meters are, and then also what are some strategies you can use to mitigate that. So there's lots of different types of resistance when it comes to user adoption. So I wondered if you might kind of give us a high level of some of the resistant themes you see in working with your clients that have implemented a new system and are struggling with getting their overall workforce to engage with this new technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I generally like to look at things in two buckets. It's usually the intentional resistance and the unintentional resistance. The intentional resistance is, I don't know why we're making this change. We've been doing this for 20 years and it's not broken. Like, this is how all things have always been done. And just really that, don't move my cheese type of scenario where people just don't want to change because change is uncomfortable and can be hard. And then the more dangerous one that we see oftentimes is the unintentional change, which is not realizing that they don't want to learn a new system, or not realizing that this change is making them uncomfortable and stressing them out. They just know that something's happening and they aren't as happy with their job as they were before. So being able to identify that unintentional resistance is something that we really work to try and understand.
Absolutely. As a former intentional resistor, which Eric has pointed out in many of our podcasts, I, on the sales side, and I learned that sales organizations largely are the main offender of resistance, is, I was always such a high performer. I would always say, like, why do I need to put these notes in here? Because that makes absolutely no sense. I'm not doing that. And right. I know that that's easy to identify, right? Because those are often very vocal collaborators within the organization. But how do you identify the people that are struggling with an unintentional resistance?
We really try and tease that out at the start of our process. We really try and understand in the workshops, if people are passionate about the tools that they use, if they are proud of the processes and procedures that they put in place. That's often an indicator that they're going to be guilty of an unintentional resistance. Really questioning, like, why do we really need a new system? Like, maybe being on board, maybe vocal, but more that questioning rather than, the intentional was like, I don't see why I need to do this. It's just not really understanding the point and the purpose behind what it is that's happening, I think is one of the big things that we try and tease out all the way through our process.
So moving into that strategic tactic conversation. So say you have gone into workshops and you see this area of the business, maybe it's a subculture, maybe it's a specific department, and kind of red flags are going up, right? We might have some issues with this department kind of getting on board. What do you do, or you advise the organization to do at that point to mitigate any sort of lag in user adoption because of resistance?
We generally try and focus in on what future state could look like, pulling out some of those pain points. We focus on pain points a lot, actually, and a lot of times when there's unintentional resistance, there's pain there, but people don't notice it because it's just what they've always done. And so by educating them on, hey, this is a really not a great process. I can see why it's causing you pain, and here's how a modern solution could help to alleviate that. I think that's one way that we definitely try and position that conversation with our clients. We also try to get them to focus on what the future state of folks' jobs could be and how they could, get them excited about what their new life could look like. Someone who's crunching numbers in Excel all day, when the system will take care of that, empower them to say, I know that you're smart, you are highly attentive to detail, and we think that we can use you, working on this new exciting project or this new process after our new system goes live, because that function will no longer be required for you to spend hours doing that. So really showing the value that you see in your people and translating that and making sure that that's well communicated has been really effective for us.
Excellent. And when you are trying to establish, or maybe we say transform that value from, hey, you built this process, you have this amazing spreadsheet, that's awesome. This system is going to automate, a lot of what you do. I assume that can create some fear and really a lot of resistance around those sort of tribal knowledge, and that user adoption at that point will really, really ripple down. So what are some things you can do to get in front of that or address that in establishing value, but in a different way?
Yeah, I think a lot of people know that it's there. They know that that person's been maintaining that spreadsheet, that they're very proud of it, that they've worked very hard on it, and they go through the process and they don't acknowledge that. They don't acknowledge how much work has gone in, how well that has worked, and how much they're excited to have them redeployed on something else that can drive even more value. So I think acknowledging the work and the value that they've provided, and then helping to position, here's where we see you fitting in the future, or asking them, if you weren't spending 12 hours a week working on this, what other exciting things do you think you could do? And once that conversation starts to happen and that light starts to go on, you can find someone going from a detractor to a promoter very quickly.
That's really great insight, and super important, especially for those people that are very loyal and have a deep bond with the organization. You want to harvest that and respect it, but also translate it into something that can grow the entire business and scale to other areas. Definitely really important.
Yeah.
So when it comes to looking at how you assess or measure user adoption, what are some best practices that you can use to analyze how this is going, how the system is working? Is that typically within the software itself, or is that a different type of assessment?
Yeah, we have some tools here at Third Stage that we work with that'll allow us to see if there are workarounds or not, to plug into existing systems and get an understanding of the flow of data. So that's one of the tools that we use. But then there's also some soft, less data-driven evaluations that we'll do, where we'll just check in on the health of things and reassess some of the pain points that we saw before the transformation, and then do a 360 and come back and say, hey, you've been using the system now for a few months. Are you still feeling the same pain that you were feeling before? Oftentimes there will be new pain points that come up, and that's a great opportunity to course correct, because no transformation is perfect right out of the gate. But by checking the pulse on things, you can really get an understanding of what you're doing well and where you need to go and focus your time and effort.
Absolutely. So when you do these types of assessments, is there a cultural component that you often see within different organizations that are more, maybe have an appetite for change or are built around innovation? Is that more successful, or is that more difficult because you're working with a culture of entrepreneurs? What are some insights you could give to us about that?
Yeah, I think some of the departments and the parts within a business that tend to be a little bit more traditional, oftentimes have a harder time with the adoption, because they, your sales, your operations teams, they oftentimes want some cutting edge tools and see the value in that. For folks that are in the finance and accounting space, a lot of times they say, well, my old tool did this just as well. What's the benefit for me? And sometimes really the benefit is the data that you are providing is now centralized and available to other people around the organization. So it didn't really make a huge difference in your world, but the work that you are doing is now publicly available to be able to make better decisions across the organization. So I think bringing that all back and putting that perspective in front of the folks who maybe didn't see as much of a change is helpful to bring adoption along for someone who may be lagging.
And with that piece, it sounds like there is almost a post step, right, to a digital transformation, and it's not something that just ends at go live. There's measurement and assessment and just overall analysis that needs to happen post transformation. Yeah,
I would say, if you think you're done transforming, then you really never are. It's great now that we've enabled these capabilities. What's next? And what can we now do? What are we well positioned now to do that we weren't before? And then you might fine tune and tweak your system even further from there to go and execute on a new opportunity that you weren't able to do before. So I would say it's constantly changing.
Well, I think that's a great place to stop. It is a marathon, not a sprint. So thank you, Mitch, for this amazing insight. If you do want to hear more from Mitch and team, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then also our podcast. Digital Stratosphere podcast comes out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Our sister Ground Control podcast, which Mitch has been a frequent guest on, is our longer form our longer form podcast that comes out every Wednesday. So please subscribe to our channel. And then you can also watch our live streams on Tuesdays as well with Eric's interviews. Thank you so much, Mitch, for being here. We really appreciate all your insight. And if you do have any questions, audience, for Mitch, please feel free to leave them in the comments of whatever platform you're consuming this content, as we can get answers for you and reply there. So this is Digital Stratosphere. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week.